Welcome back to Observing the Sabbath. I'm your host, Nathaniel Molnar. I'm joined once again by Johnny Gifford. Johnny, thanks for being here.
Nathaniel, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me, my friend.
Of course. I love having you here. It's always fun to do the videos together because I just love having sort of a back and forth instead of me just kind of droning away into a camera all by myself. It's good to
Absolutely.
have additional points of view.
Yeah.
And it's also great to have you here because we are kicking off Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the 5th studio album by Black Sabbath. We've done, it's crazy to think, we've done Black Sabbath, we've done Paranoid, we've done Master of Reality, and we've done Volume 4. And so now we're moving on to their 5th album, which we're really, I'm very excited to kind of get into this next stage of their 8 studio albums, the original 8-year run that they did as a band before they split off. The first half of it is really interesting, and we of course spent a very long time going through all those songs and talking through the history and what's going on behind the scenes as they're making those albums. But there's also so much to talk about the latter half, the second half, because we are really halfway through their original 8 albums. And so it's great to have you here to kick it off as we dive into essentially part 2 of the first 8 years of Black Sabbath.
Absolutely, yeah. And I feel like Volume 4 to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is sort of that split. And with Volume 4 maybe being, my favorite conceptually as an album. And I feel like we're kind of at our peak of original Sabbath here, just in my personal opinion. So yeah, I'm looking forward to looking at these tracks.
Yeah. So before we dive into the song Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, let's set the stage a little bit. So you've listened to the first 4 albums with us. You've talked about some of the songs with us. What are your thoughts so far as we are kind of distinguishing this as the breaking point of part 1 into part 2 of their original 8 years? What are you thinking of them so far as a band? What are your thoughts on the original 4, and what are some thoughts going into this next stage of Sabbath?
Well, you can definitely hear from the beginning they're very much like a live rock band. That's their sound, that's the way that they write their songs, that's the way they record them, and that's the way they're putting them out too. And as you go throughout their discography, they're becoming more and more of a studio band, given they're still rocking out and playing some cool live shows, of course. But you see this like level of production that they're really paying a lot more attention to. You see like added layers and different instrumentation. They're not just like their guitars and bass and drums and the screaming vocals the entire time. You got some really nice like acoustic tracks, and like we're gonna look at the song Fluff at some point as well. And that song is a good example of them just kind of taking a step back and experimenting with their sound and just the structure of an album and what that means to like write and record an album as an album, not as a collection of songs. So you see a lot more focus on that in their music going forward, and I feel like that just keeps ramping up and up until this album right here, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, with an absolute banger to kick it off with, Sabbath, the self-titled or the title track of the album, which is something that they're so classic and so known for doing, is just leading off albums with something with a really good hook to sort of introduce people to their world.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you just said. When I look at these 2 stages of their career, I think this is something I've talked a lot about over the course of the videos that we've done so far for the first original 4 albums. But I'll say it again, and you were touching upon this before as well. The first 2 albums were really them kind of recording their live show that they did. This was their live set, and they just kind of went to the studio and let's just record what we've been working on. And starting with Master of Reality and then going all the way through the rest of their albums, they really start working on the production elements of actually, let's craft this album in the studio and kind of figure out all these different elements and create it in that sense. And I think once you get to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, you really see that hitting almost its peak of adding all these additional elements in the studio that you wouldn't necessarily have when you're just performing it live on a stage in front of an audience. And I think by the time you get to Spiral Architect at the very end of the album, where you kind of have like a whole chorus and all these things happening, you really see that they are adding so many different unique elements into the album to make it more of like a studio album as opposed to just what, say, Black Sabbath or Paranoid was, of just playing their live show. And I think in some spots it doesn't necessarily work as well as maybe I would have liked, but in almost every other part I think it works really well to create something very dynamic and unique and has really strong sound. And then I think when you look at some of their live shows where they're playing some of these songs from this album in particular, like when they do Sabbath Bloody Sabbath live, or when they do Spiral Architect live, or when they do Killing Yourself to Live live, you hear the root DNA of those songs on stage that you hear in this album. And while it doesn't necessarily have all those added elements that they have the luxury of being able to do in the studio, the meat of the song, the focus of the song, what the song really is at its core, is still conveyed on stage. And I think that's something that, and I'm sure other bands are able to kind of do this as well, but when I listen to Sabbath, that's something that really stands out to me, is that they are able to create something in the studio for an album that has all these extra elements, but then they can still perform it live, and while it may not have those added elements to it when they perform it live, you still feel like it's that song. And it's just because when you take away all those extra elements and you root the songs down to their bare form, it's the four of them. It's the guitars by Tony, the drums by Bill, the bass by Geezer, and the vocals by Ozzy. It's the four of them at the center, and everything else is just an added bonus. But you can strip all that away and still get to the core of what those songs really are.
For sure, yeah. And I think going off of that, you see lots of bands as they're progressing throughout their career, and as they're getting more money, they're getting record deals probably, and they're getting their labels supporting them financially to go into the studio and to just mess around and produce albums. This just kind of overproduction of albums coming about, and that happens a lot nowadays. I'm sure it was happening a lot in the 70s, 80s, and whatnot as well. But you get to a point where a lot of bands are releasing music that feels like it's kind of lacking some sort of soul, or some sort of any sort of semblance of a raw energy that this is where these songs came from and originated from, and it just turns into like just music for the sake of music, not as like an emotional expression. But I think Black Sabbath at this point in their career is doing a really good job of keeping on that fine line between like having really well thought out production, but also keeping their songs straightforward enough where they can play them live and they still retain all of the same qualities. Everything added in the studio versions are just to sweeten it and to make it that much more exciting, not to just kind of oversaturate it with things, or to take away from any of like the raw emotions that are in it. Because I think all of those are preserved with this album. And I don't know for sure if that got better or worse in terms of overproduction throughout the next few albums. I feel like I'd have to re-listen to them to really give a judgment on that. But this album in particular and the last album, I think, are really on that nice fine line of being really well produced, really thoughtfully produced, but not overproduced by any means.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, kind of going off what you were saying, you have a lot of music today where they use those extra elements that we keep discussing. In my opinion, one of the absolute banes of music is autotune. And just whatever. I don't get me started on autotune. But these extra elements, they're not being used to like mask the abilities of the performers. Like, they're not using it as a crutch because they're not able to perform themselves. Like, I think autotune is used a lot for people who don't necessarily have the greatest range with their voice to be able to kind of hit some notes that they wouldn't be able to hit without it. Black Sabbath isn't using these extra elements in that way. They're only using it to prop up the talent that they already have and to add to it and expand upon it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we've covered just about all of my thoughts on this album, and I'm ready to get into it when you are.
Yeah, awesome. All right, let's just jump right into it. And I say this almost every video, and I want to reiterate it from the top before we dive into the whole album. These are not your typical reaction videos where people are listening to these songs for the first time. I love those videos. I watch a ton of them and they're great, but that's just not what this channel or these videos are. Johnny and I have both heard this song many times before, have heard all Black Sabbath songs several times before. And so this is more us kind of commentating through the song, giving you our thoughts as we listen to the song together. So without any further ado, shall we just jump right in to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath?
Let's do it.
All right. This is the first song on the 5th studio album, the album Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the song Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. And now.
Nice.
And this is something very similar to Volume 4. I mentioned in that album, they don't really have any fades in for their songs. They just jump right into it.
Especially with the first song on the album. That's important.
Yeah. Ozzy's voice is so good. He only gets better with every album, I think.
Definitely. And it's good that he's starting this album with just the screeching vocals that he's known for. But still staying on pitch at the same time. They're not like... They're still melodic.
Yeah. And you get now into like sort of the change of pace in the songs, which they do a lot throughout their albums. Especially once you get to Sabotage, like almost every song in there has these drastic points of change where they just completely change everything up. And you definitely hear that here.
Yeah, and you hear this, it has a totally different feeling than the first part of this song, but you can still play this live by just, Tony's turning off his distortion for this part, and has some clean guitar for a bit. You can accomplish the same thing, but they're doing it with, more acoustic instruments in their studio version. And then, of course, back to this sick-ass riff.
It's so good, isn't it? And
I
love
so good.
The lyrics for Sabbath Bloody Sabbath as the album. Really interesting. They really go to some places that they have not gone to lyrically before. It's far more.
This one's very, very just like rock and roll kind of thing, and kind of fuck the establishment in a way too. Which is one of their many topics that they touch on a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you hear the Hands of Doom reference?
Oh yeah. In that verse, yep.
They do that a few times throughout their albums where they make a reference to some other lyric that they had before, which is great. But yeah, no, their lyrics for this album get very abstract. Like for a lot of their other albums, like they're very kind of, I don't want to say straightforward, but they're kind of clear as to what they're talking about. You have sort of like the anti-war, you have the more political songs, you have the songs about drugs, you have the songs about this or that. But Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the album, has far more abstract lyrics.
I think a lot of the overall concepts that they're talking about remain pretty similar in this album, but I think the way they deliver them is a lot more poetic. Like you said, less straightforward language. It's all about just vernacular and verbiage. I think that's what really changes with this album.
I think that's a really key point. It's poetic, and it's more like the way that it's worded as opposed to what it's actually talking about, and that's all Geezer. And that's all Geezer. Geezer does not get enough credit, not just with being the bassist, but the lyrics that he crafts.
Exactly, yeah, he really doesn't get enough credit. I feel like anyone who listens to this without knowing otherwise is going to think Ozzy's writing the lyrics.
Yeah, and he writes a couple of songs straight up, but it's all Geezer mostly. And here we go.
Here, yes, the classic Sabbath bridge. Oh, this part is so just dark and visceral. I love it.
I love the contrast of Ozzy's vocal tone to the grittiness of the guitar.
the vocal tone really sounds like he's just like standing inside of like a closet, like with just just like totally dark, surrounded by coats. He's just screaming in the corner of this closet.
Yeah. And I remember the first time I heard this, I was like, oh, that does not sound good, Ozzy. You can't go that high. But every time I've listened to it since, I just like come to love it.
Those are the songs and the albums that really stick with you, the ones that just get better and better the more you listen to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you and I have specifically talked a lot about the unconventional nature of Ozzy's voice and how it works so well for the type of music that they're making. And this is such a great example of it. Like if you were to have like a
absolutely,
like if you were to have like an opera or something, or like a beautiful stage performance, and someone were to come out singing like this, everybody would like demand their money back. But for something like this, it's just, you couldn't have sung it any other way.
And Ozzy's totally doing this purposefully too, because we've heard before he has a fantastic singing voice, and he can sing really elegantly when he wants to. But this is just fitting the style of music that they're playing.
Absolutely, he's really that's the root of it for him as a singer. He fits the vocal tone of the song, and Tony has said himself that Ozzy has a voice built for ballads, but he doesn't always do that.
Nope.
But he just goes for what needs to be done for the song, and this is a great example. This closer is so good.
Gotta close it with a solo.
Yeah, because
I love how Tony can do so many of these solos double tracks too. Like you hear multiple takes of the same complicated riffs and solos in like, you know, each ear. It's crazy that he can match some of those melodies so well.
Yeah. And also, like, until you just said it, I didn't really think about the fact that Tony doesn't really have like a classic solo throughout this whole song. It's really not until you get to the outro of the song that he really gets this part to kind of just go crazy.
Yep, and that's it. That's our Sabbath Bloody Sabbath title track on the album.
What a great song. That is one of my... I don't know where it would necessarily be on like a top 10 or something like that, but that is one of their best songs, I think.
It just jumps so much. Like at some points they're a rock band, at some points they're a metal band, at some point they feel like you know, just an 80s kind of, you know, whatever was popular at that time kind of band. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, no. They just have so much range within, like, not even within range within albums, but range within songs. And that's something that, like, a lot of artists don't even consider, of, like, changing up the total feeling and vibe of your song within of your sound within a song, and that's something that they do really well with.
Yeah, no 1 minute of a Black Sabbath song sounds like the next minute. They just completely change it.
But, and you know, like we were saying before, it's still in a way where they could play this live and it would still sound normal, and like you wouldn't bat an eye at it whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I think this song sounds so different from the rest of the album. Like, they really get to, like especially, like, when the song takes its turn and it gets to that really gritty, dark, like, grisly guitar riff. Like, you don't really hit that point anywhere else on the album. Like, you have a lot of other songs, like Looking for Today, which is more, I think, maybe other than Technical Ecstasy, the closest thing to get to a pop song that Black Sabbath does. But it's a great song, Looking for Today, but it's a lot lighter. You get Who Are You, which is more just kind of strange as opposed to, like, dark. And you don't really hit that. And Fluff, of course, is, like, these beautiful, like it almost sounds like an orchestra is composing this, like, beautiful melody. But you don't really hit that same level of, like, sinister that you get in the song.
Yep, that's their sinister peak of this album for sure.
Absolutely. And I think when you look at the album cover of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which I think is one of my favorite album covers that they have, just because it's so out there. Like,
you kind of expect the whole album to sound like that one moment in Sabbath Bloody Sabbath based on the album cover.
Yeah, really, honestly. And I think also just talk about the album covers, like, up until that point, Sabbath had really gone for simplicity with their album covers. Like the first one, you just have the woman in the forest with the house behind her, which I love that image. It's beautiful. But it's very simple, you know. And for Paranoid, you have the cop. Very kind of simple. Master of Reality doesn't even have an image. It's just the letters. Volume 4 is just like the outline of Ozzy on stage. And then you get the Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, and it's like this like actual like piece of art that was like constructed for this album. And it's just like, whoa, there's so much going on here.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so it's a nice contrast to what they've done before. And then you listen to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the titular song, and you're like, oh yeah, this is just gonna be like grisly, sinister all the way through. And then you don't really have that for the rest of the album. And I don't want to necessarily call it a bait and switch, but there is sort of like, you kind of, I would imagine somebody in 1973 seeing that album and being like, whoa, this is gonna be intense, and sit down and they listen to that first song and they're like, what is the rest of this album going to be like? And it never quite hits that point again. There's some great stuff in there, but it doesn't really follow through on almost that promise that the album cover and the initial song has.
Yeah, really ahead of their time, just in general, I think, too.
Yeah.
Like, no one was doing stuff like this and with this much range at that time, either.
Absolutely. And we still have to keep in mind, this is 1973.
I know, right?
This is only 3 years since they put out their first album. In 3 years, look at how much growth and development that they've had as a band in just 3 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, this is a really interesting song, and I think it also contains, other than maybe them saying hell, I don't know if they say damn or not. But this is the only use of a swear word that they really have in any of their music, when they say you bastard. It's the only time. Which I think is kind of interesting, because for a band that's sort of had, at the time and as the years have gone on, this sort of perception of being evil or satanic, you know, they don't really swear at all, which I think is kind of interesting.
No, that's just something that lies in, you know, at the time, people's perceptions of them aesthetically, and I guess kind of sonically as well. They look at a band like that and they just assume it's, you know, satanic or whatever. They hear rock music and they just think that's kind of satanic as well. It's I feel like those claims aren't really based on anything else. Like, I mean, look at the poster behind you. Ozzy's wearing a cross around his neck.
Yeah. No, they all had big crosses, and a lot of them were like, you know, actual like Christian God believers and whatnot. But I think that's also just speaks to the time that this was coming out, and you know, you have the satanic panic, and you have all these sort of things going on at the time. The contextual history of everything that's going on is really interesting. So for me to kind of look at Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the album as a whole really feels more like a heavy rock as opposed to like a metal. But then you get something like the album cover and that first song, and that feels more metal. And so it's sort of interesting kind of contrast there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what a great start to this album. It just kind of similar to Wheels of Confusion, similar to Sweet Leaf, similar to Black Sabbath, and similar to War Pigs. It just throws you right into the deep end and just kicks off the album with a strong start.
Yep, gets you really interested and gets you wanting to listen to the rest of it for sure.
Absolutely. So those are all my thoughts on the song. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Nope, I think we've covered just about everything.
Yeah, so that is it. That is Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. I want to know from you guys, what are all your thoughts on the song? Do you agree with us? Do you have any points that you kind of disagree with? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. Once again, I'm Nathaniel Molnar. I'd like to thank Johnny Gifford for being here. Johnny, thanks for joining me for this one.
Thanks, Nathaniel. Always a pleasure.
Always great to have you. So you can make sure to like, make sure to comment, make sure to subscribe for more content, and come back as we tackle the next song on the album, A National Acrobat, which is also a very unique and a very interesting song. So until then, until we discuss A National Acrobat, thanks for watching.